Welcome to A Waldorf Journey, a podcast for teachers, parents, students, and people who are passionate about Waldorf education. I'm Meredith, and I'm glad you're here. I spent nearly 20 years in the Waldorf classroom, and I learned a thing or two about teaching in all those years, and some of those lessons were not easy. Through it all, though, I've come to the conclusion that there's nothing better than Waldorf for nurturing thoughtful human beings who love to learn. You can find show notes for this episode, along with a lot more useful content on my website, awaldorfjourney.com. While you're there, sign up for the newsletter to receive updates about new content on the blog and the podcast. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram as A Waldorf Journey. Now let's get started. Hi, and welcome to this episode of A Waldorf Journey. This episode, we're lucky and fortunate that my colleague Laura Elmore is joining us. And Laura and I were just in the staff room the other day, and we were talking about class plays. And she just finished her class play with her 5th grade class. And so we thought it would be nice to have her on and talk a little bit about the Waldorf class play. So I'm glad to have, a partner to speak with about this in this episode. And I did want to mention that if you are listening to this on audio, I have started posting these episodes on YouTube as well. So if you want to see Laura and I talk face to face, on Zoom, then check out the video on YouTube, and I will link to that in the show notes. So that's it. I hope you enjoy this conversation about the Waldorf class play. Hi, everyone. I am here with my colleague, Laura Elmore, and we thought we would get together and just talk about Waldorf class plays and why we do them. I know that Laura just wrapped up her class play with her 5th graders, so it seems like a timely topic to be talking about. And you and I talked a little bit, and we have some common views and some, anyway, I think it'll be an interesting conversation to have. But first, Laura, can you just give a little introduction to yourself, who you are and what you do and all of that?
Thank you, Meredith, of course. My name's Laura Elmore. I have been involved in Waldorf education since my first daughter was 3 and she's 30 now, so 27 years. I've taught in early childhood programs and grades programs, both in Michigan, in Missouri, and now here in Oregon. I've taught at the Bend Waldorf School, and now I am at Cedarwood Waldorf School in downtown Portland, working with Meredith. And I currently am teaching the 5th grade class at Cedarwood Waldorf School. I've also been involved in Waldorf teacher training at the Michael Institute for the past 15 years or so, and I help organize the grades program over there. So
great, awesome. Lots of things on Laura's plate. You and I are similar in that we can't help ourselves.
Yes. Well, then you just keep doing it, right?
Right.
Find new ways to do it.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so let's kind of dive in. Maybe let's just set the scene a little bit. So you just finished your class play. Tell me what play you did and, about your class, just talk a little bit about the play.
Yeah, so we just finished a play, Greece. So it was the homecoming of Odysseus. So it's the very end of Odysseus's story when he comes home after being lost at sea for 21 years, and he finds that there's several kings and princes trying to marry his wife and take over his kingdom. So there's a great battle at the end of the scene, or at the end of the play, in which the students had a big sword fight and got to, win their right to be back in Ithaca, or Odysseus's right to be back in Ithaca. But originally, I didn't know if I was going to do a Greek play this year or not. I had a Persian play I was interested in taking on. And of course, I love Egyptian plays. Egyptian plays are so much fun. I've had a great time doing those with classes in the past. But when I brought the ideas to 5th grade, which I often do starting in 5th grade, I don't necessarily just take on selecting the play by myself. I have conversations with the students and have them have some input and buy-in into which play we're going to perform because, of course, they're the ones performing it, right? I'm only directing. And so,
Only
only,
directing.
right. Which entails a lot, yes.
Right.
But anyhow, so I brought a couple different ideas to them about these other scripts I was interested in pursuing. And they were just very, very adamant that they wanted to do a Greek play. And several of the scripts I had for a Greek play, I actually did not like and didn't think they would be very good for this class. And then finally, I came across this script given to me by our current sixth grade teacher at Cedarwood Waldorf School, Kelly Marquis. She did this play with one of her fifth grade classes years past and was able to share the script with me. And so when I read it, I thought, okay, this is the one.
That's
I could
great.
see all the characters in my class, like which ones would fit into which roles, and started to then cast from there. So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
which I
great.
can talk about the casting process too, if you're
Well, isn't that
interested.
funny? I mean, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. I already am having so many questions, but like I remember having that experience of reading through a play, and the way that I knew that it was the play was that it was starting to cast itself, like as I was reading it, like I could imagine different students. So, and then I remember like questioning that, like, okay, does that mean that I'm like leaning into typecasting, or is that like, should I pay attention to that, or should I try to, break that up a little bit? But I think invariably I followed it. Like that's what I did do that play. If I could start imagining, the casting, that I did do it. Even though I know that I did do some, like pedagogical casting, where it's like
Right.
somebody needs a certain role. I did do some of that as well, but there is just something anyway, let's talk a little bit about that. Like talk about the casting and how
Yeah.
that came
Yeah,
to
it's such
be.
a balance, isn't it, between like knowing that a student would be really great at this part and then thinking, well, another student might not be as great at it, but yet could really benefit from it in a pedagogical
Yeah.
perspective as far as their growth and learning. So you're always trying to balance this aspect in the play because you also want to have strength in the play to carry it through. So you need to cast some people that you know are going to be spot on and just really great at that part. And then other people, you're casting hoping that they're going to rise up to the challenge that's given. And
Yeah,
so it's a
and
constant balance between the two.
I remember sometimes feeling like the double cast would maybe help me resolve that. And then as I think about it now, like if I did that, or if I did double cast it so that, we had like, so the person who could really do it well had the role, and then the person who needed that experience also had the role, then like there's a conflict in that. Like I was actually maybe like pitting them against each other in a way where one person like actually had a huge advantage. Like it was, kind of made for them, and the other person needed to work at it. And like come to think of it, when I last time I taught fifth grade, I did exactly this. Like there was a role where somebody was going to be just like perfect, like so good at this role, and then somebody else like needed that. And I didn't give it another thought. Like I didn't think, oh, I'm, doing setting up this potential messy thing. And the child who needed the role like actually like was amazing. Like just like
Right.
really got what they needed by doing it. And for in that case it was, they needed it like not only for their own experience but also for the class, to like
Mhm.
see them in that way. And so it was hugely successful in that regard. But anyway, just I wonder, have you struggled with that in terms of that, like putting them against each other? Like somebody's going to do really
Yeah,
well
I
and
mean, if we
somebody's
didn't struggle with it, we wouldn't be doing our jobs, right? Like that's so
right.
much of the effort that we put in is struggling over the nuances of what is healthiest for each individual and what is healthiest for the whole of the class. and their social growth and emotional development. That's so much of the challenge that faces us when we're working with casting a play. And at some point in time, you have to like leave it up to fate. Like, okay, this is the decision, and we're hoping that everybody rises up to it and everyone
Yeah.
does their good work. And I've double casted a play, and actually, this past play I did not double cast. There were so many characters in the play itself that it was really easy to find a place for all 28 students to fit in. Sometimes I'll double cast when I feel like I just don't, some people will have a role that has absolutely no lines.
Right.
And then, you want to find a place for them to have some lines and some input. And so this particular play, I chose not to double cast. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that many of the scenes had a lot of interplay and dialogue that was back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, which took a lot of will and strength for them to follow along in those threads and still act into it and remember their lines and remember when they were supposed to jump in, that I just felt having a different person do that at different times would just add another layer of difficulty.
Yeah.
And I really wanted them to sink into the parts that they had. This year, I actually did do something new for casting, which was really fun and exciting for me to hear back from them a little bit more. But often, I will have students at this age choose like their top three picks of what they want. Like these are the
Hmm.
top three things, parts that I'm interested in, which means they have to have the script ahead of time. They have to read through it. We have to discuss the play, how it's organized for them to be able to choose that, to pick like what would be their top three choices, which I've done that before in other plays, but I added a little nuance to that this year, and I had them essentially, I actually have the index cards right here that they wrote on, so they had to write on part of it like their top three choices, and then on the back side they had to write why they thought they deserved those parts and
Ah.
why they were interested in those parts. And I asked them to consider the whole of the class, the parts that they've had in the past versus what parts they may want in the future, and like where this plays into that. Like if they've always had a lead role, maybe it's good for them to step back and not have a lead role. So I really had them like take deeply into consideration not just their own part in the play, but the whole class's part in the play. And some of the feedback I got from them was just amazing. Like it blew my
Mm.
mind. Like that's why I haven't recycled the cards yet because I enjoy like looking back through them, and hearing some of the things that they had to say that were really in consideration of the whole of the class.
Yeah.
Students were saying things like, I've had a lead role before, and I really feel like even though I love a lead role, that maybe this is the year I need to step back and have a lesser role. Some students said, I've never had a lead role and I've always been afraid to, but I want to try this year. Some students said, if I ever had a lead role, this would be the year because Greek mythology is my favorite topic. And I don't feel like I could ever step up to this role unless it was with Greek mythology.
Wow.
And so to
That's
just
great.
hear this real insightful consideration of the part that they wanted and how deeply they were thinking about it
Yeah.
really was just inspiring to me. And I probably casted students in places I wouldn't have thought to cast them had I not had like that deeper feedback from them and
Yeah.
that contemplation. And they took it to heart. Like some of them took 2 or 3 days to fill out the index card
Wow.
because they just were still thinking about it. They
Yeah.
still weren't really sure what they wanted. And, some people said, I don't care what part I have,
Yeah. Yeah.
So there was
Yeah.
like lots of variance in how they responded, but it was so fantastic to hear from them, their reasoning
Yeah.
behind why they wanted that part.
That's great. I have just to note like a couple other ways I've heard about involving students in the casting. And then I want to like move on and talk about like a little bit of earlier grades. But in, I think it was sixth or seventh grade, I actually had the students, I gave them like a character list, a list of all the parts and asked them to cast it.
Mm,
And so, and I've done other situations where they like they could they it wasn't about what they wanted. They had to like put other people in, nominate other people in different roles. And so I think there are some interesting, fun ways to involve students. And I remember I think it might have been eighth grade when I asked them to cast it. And, I was very clear, like, this is not a democracy. Like I am casting this play. But, I'm curious about your thoughts and, I just wonder what you would do. And I remember it was in eighth grade and it was Peter Pan and they like, I mean, everybody came back with almost exactly what I would have done, what I did end up doing. So I mean, it was really interesting to see. But I
Can I
do want
ask
to
you a
talk.
question about that?
Yeah, yeah.
Did you have them like each turn in a different casting, or did they have to work collaboratively and turn in one casting as a class?
I had them work individually. And
Okay,
so, yeah, so I got like, 26 different,
cast.
yeah, but they pretty
Potential
much all
possibilities.
aligned. And because I think by that point they had been talking and everybody had tried out different roles, so they could, they could imagine it maybe a little more. And that's actually what I wanted to talk about now is because we've been talking about this, in the context of a fifth grade play.
Right.
Um, but like for my experience, it looks very different in the lower grades. And I know that you have I have more experience I think in the upper grades, but you've been through those lower grades a few times. And a mentor told me one time that and the example she used was fourth grade. And she said that she said you should wait to cast. Like don't
Mhm.
decide early on what who's going to play what part because every child should get a turn to be Loki and
Yeah.
to be Odin and I just want and that's a really hard thing to I found it to be a really hard thing to do because like you want to get people practicing in the parts that they're going to be playing and like how long can you kind of just stay in this like playing with the play sort of
Ambiguous
mode.
space.
Right. And like and I think I think she's absolutely right. Like they do all need to have a chance to play these different parts. So I don't know, what do you have any experience with that? And do you have any thoughts about how to make that work? Or
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I mean, you brought up fourth grade, which is not far removed from fifth grade. And I think that, there's a shifting that happens in the fourth and fifth grade, like in what you can do in that regards. But, I feel like in first, second, third grade, it's really easy to have the play almost as like extended circle work, right?
yeah,
Like you're just acting it out as a class, and each day you put a different colored silk on a different student, and they get to be the lions, or they get to be the ravens, or they get to be the saint, or and they learn the play itself really as a long choral speech. Like that
yeah,
they're able to say all of the lines. And usually in first, second, and even third grade, you often don't even have them say separate lines. They often are saying the entire play all the way through from the beginning to the end, and maybe stepping out and doing different acting pieces as they're portraying those different parts. But it's really, third grade, they can start to have those individual lines that step in. But I still find that even in third grade, they all know those individual lines. Like if you look at a third grade performing, and let's say you have someone come out and they're Joseph and they say a few lines for Joseph. If you look at the whole class, you'll see all of them mouthing those same lines, right? Like
right.
they all know all of the lines. And I don't think that's much different in fourth grade. I think in fourth grade you can still kind of work out of that same premise that you're learning the entire script, everybody's learning different parts. But they're saying those different parts intermittently so that everybody's getting it, like you said, an opportunity to play Loki or to play Odin or to play,
Yeah,
Aduna or whatever play that you're doing, so that and maybe it's not everyone, but a good portion of the kids get a chance to say it. And
yeah,
maybe even have groups of people all saying the Loki line at the same time or saying the Aduna line at the same time. So they all get that chance like
yeah,
throughout the practice.
yeah,
But I like to usually by I'd say, the second, like, I'd say the third or fourth week, if you're doing a 4 week block, like start to really hone in on who's going to be that part so that by, those last six practices or whatever it is,
Yeah.
you really have an idea of who is going to be Loki in the performance. In
Yeah.
fourth grade, I did double cast it for that particular reason because
Hmm.
we had all practiced so many of the parts, and I wanted them to have an opportunity, like to have more than one person be that
Yeah.
part in front of the whole of the school and the parent body and everybody that they were performing for.
Yeah, I
Um,
remember in first and second grade, I think both of those years, like I felt like I had to decide who was going to do the parts in the performance more for the sake of the parents to, so that they could make sure that they could attend, the performance that their child was going to, play the part in. But it was probably the week of, in first and
right,
second grade, because
right,
like you
right.
said, they
Yep,
all know it. It's all just like,
yep,
fun, and you tie the scarf on and it's you today, and
right, right,
that works really well. In third grade, I remember it wasn't about the lines, like everybody knew the lines, and it was about like there were tricky, we did Moses, and I remember there were tricky parts where it was like, oh, this prop needs to go over here at
right,
this
right.
time, and like those were the things that like the person playing the role needed to, have that. It was more about the movement and the, logistics than the speaking. So that third grade play was crazy because we were scheduled to perform it the week after shutdown, the COVID
COVID,
shutdown.
yeah.
And so on the Friday when we found out that, or I guess we found out Thursday night that we were going to be closed, the next week, I just called all the parents and said, we're performing tomorrow. And so, and so it
This is
was,
it.
we were
Here we
not
go.
ready, but it was, everybody rallied, and we had no costumes, or, we didn't have that figured out. And parents came and we like just tied scarves on kids, and like, it was such a wild
Well, I
experience.
mean, that really begs the question too of like, why do we even do
Well,
these
right.
plays, you know?
Yes, let's talk about that, because that, you know, I think a lot about the play, and, it being it's this very visible, demonstration of our work, in a lot of ways. And so how do we negotiate that, manage that, and, and keep it a learning and growth, experience? Because I remember when I was a new teacher feeling so much stress about the play, and just feeling like it had to be polished, it had to be really well done. And if not, I was revealing myself to be a failure as a teacher. And
Right,
that, that feeling transformed. And, I recognize, like, if it is polished and perfect, actually, that's a problem. Like that means that learning stopped, like
right.
probably a few, maybe a week ago. And so
Yes.
it really, like, yeah, so maybe you could talk a little bit about, like, how do we adjust parents' expectations, or yeah, I don't know, how do we manage that so that our students are, continually growing and learning through the experiences we
Yeah.
provide them.
I mean, so much of it comes back to, I mean, it's so cultural too. Like we're such a performative culture. Like, we want things to be just right and to, be formed in a certain way that it can be presented as perfect. I mean, we see it across our media spectrum, like, just fashion and beauty in itself. We struggle with when it's not the perfect image of what we're looking for.
Yeah.
So it's how do we kind of calm that performative picture and raise up like this picture of the pedagogical importance of the play, right? Like
Right.
what are we
Right.
actually doing in this work that we're coming together and doing? Um, and it's really shifting our thinking to growth mindset, to
Right.
looking at how each one of these experiences we have together throughout this production, throughout this play, throughout coming together is about social emotional growth and learning and really building that perception of growth mindset. Like, how do we see, oh, we did this wrong and that didn't feel right. So how do I transform this on the stage to like feel better. And that's what I'm always looking for, like in our performances. I always feel like if I get that one performance that we walk back to the classroom, could be during the day with the students in the school, could be in the evening, doesn't matter, but that we walk back and you can feel that kind of vibration and that the kids are just like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. We did such a good job. Like if they have that feeling, then we won. I don't care what the audience thought about it. I
Right,
don't even,
right.
I mean, of course, I want the audience to enjoy it. But sometimes you walk back from a play and the kids are feeling that buzz and they're so excited because they did everything that they felt they were trying to achieve in that performance. And the parents are still like, I don't know if I really understood what was happening in that play. And that
Right.
to me is like, okay, right? That is totally okay because it's not about the performative aspect as much as it is about them feeling they've come together collectively and collaboratively and supported each other and on the stage,
Yeah.
Yeah, is it okay if they're like whispering lines to each other? I 100% I think that's fantastic because it's showing that they're supporting each other. They're
Yeah.
trying to help uplift one another. They're trying to help build that like memory together between them of what it is they're putting together. And
Yeah.
so, those to me are the things that we're looking for is that collaborative aspect. Are they able to have an understanding of one another? Because we really are building social emotional learning through this and what it takes to be a community,
Yeah.
what it takes to come together. Are we standing in the right spot? If we're not standing in the right spot, how do we manage that? How do we work through that? Because so often in today's world, we come to something and we think what it should be, what it ought to be, what we want it to
Yeah.
be, and we
Yeah.
come to it and it's not that. And does that mean we don't respond or we walk away? Like usually we still have to process and work through it, even when it's not what we expect it to be. And the
Yeah.
play
And
gives us such a great opportunity to work with that time and time and time again. Every practice we have an opportunity to go, okay, it's not what we thought it was going to be, but how did we transform it in that moment?
yeah. And I would say like my experiences where like I've seen a play or been a part of a play where I was like, like you said, like when they're giving each other lines and like, oh, golden. I just
Right.
love that, like that it's just so and it shows just like the learning and the collaboration and but the plays I have seen it where students like are they're disappointed enough with the experience or whatever's happening that they've kind of disconnected from it, that they're
Mhm.
just not really in it anymore.
Yes.
And that is where it's like, all right, something went wrong along the way somewhere, and we want to try to, yeah, keep them in it and connected,
Yeah.
through the mistakes and
Well, and when those happen, when you feel that, like, yeah, someone's going to say a line over someone, we're going to skip a part, you're going to forget something. The growth mindset is what is important in that moment to come in and go, okay, so that happened,
right,
right?
right, right.
And what do we do about that? How do we do that better? How do we learn from that? How do we learn how to interact with each other better out
Yeah,
of that,
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's what's most important. I always say it's not the mistake that matters. It's what we do with the mistake after it happens.
right.
That's what matters because the mistakes are going to happen. That's
Yeah,
just part of life. And
right.
throughout learning, throughout being human with each other, we're going to make mistakes, be it social emotional, be it on a math problem, be it in our writing, be it in our play work together. It doesn't matter. Mistakes are going to happen.
Yeah.
And how do we transform that? That's really that growth mindset. How do we look at it afterwards? Because that's what matters the most, how we respond and
So
after that happens.
I wonder if we could talk a little bit about like as the teacher, how do we stay in that like very positive, learning growth mindset place in the midst of like a process that is so like diverse and without structure. I mean, I am a very, probably people who follow me know I am a very rhythmic person and a very, like, I really thrive in a lot with a lot of structure and rhythm and routine. And then I know, like, okay, those curveballs can happen and I can find a way to kind of incorporate them into the rhythm and routine that I have. And I think oh my gosh, I find it so hard to direct a play, because it's just like there is no, it's so hard to keep, to find structure. And like the early grades, I was so, when I was teaching the early grades, I was like, oh, I can do a play like this. This works really well. It's just part of what we do every day. Like,
Right, right.
but in the upper grades, it just is like, it's a completely different animal. And, as a very phlegmatic teacher, I just so struggled with that. And I mean, I told my students, like, I am a grumpy teacher during the play block. Like, I'm sorry. I do my best, but I can get pretty grumpy. And like it's hard to then keep that presence of mind to like take advantage of those growth opportunities and to help students see them
Yeah.
in that way. Do you have any thoughts or
I mean,
tips?
my first thought just goes to like, how do we set up the rhythm of any block, right? How do
Uh-huh.
we set up the rhythm of how we're organizing that? Because as you said, it's true. Like, that's what holds us through this. It's what keeps us grounded, not only ourselves as teachers, but the students as well. And if you start in the lower grades, setting up a rhythm of how you approach this type of work, because by the time they're th in third grade, they really are like, oh, we're actually performing, like first and second grade, they may not actually
Right.
be heightened to that awareness yet, but by the time you get to third and fourth grade, they're like, who's going to play Joseph? Like they have
Yeah.
this, like, oh, like one of us is going to get chosen to be this part, like
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
start to feel that, they understand that a little bit more. But if you're setting up a rhythm, then I think when you get like at least into the fifth and sixth grades and even seventh and eighth grade, like some of that can carry through and they see that, oh, this is how we approach this work. So in general, when I'm approaching a play, I will often, in the lower grades, it's telling the story first, right? Like
Right.
I would start with, I'm going to just tell them the story. And sometimes I'll do that 6 weeks out from the performance. So it's not even like within the block that we're doing the play, but I'm
Uh-huh.
telling the story ahead of time. So it's starting to plant those seeds of what's about to come. Like this is the story we're going to work out of. And then, of course, in the lower grades, I would start then as after they've heard the story, we would start acting it out in our circle work and like building the picture of what that's going to be. As we get into third, fourth, fifth grades, usually then I'm starting to like, especially fourth grade and fifth grade and sixth grade, I'll tell them the story. I always start with that first. They
Yeah.
always like they have to know Odysseus before we can talk
Right.
about the homecoming of Odysseus, right?
Right. Right.
So like you want them to live into the image of what that story is, and then I'll give them the script, right? Like, and especially when you're looking at fifth grade and up, I will always give them the script so they can read it, and we'll be reading it together. And then they start to build this picture where then, as we did this year, we had auditions, and then they wrote on their index cards like their the picks of choice so that I could cast it, so that when we came into our 4 week block of this play, I had it casted coming into those 4 weeks in fifth grade.
Hmm.
And like we said, third and fourth grade, I probably wouldn't have casted it as much at that point in time. But now we can start really working on speech work and development. So that's what I often will work on first is like really just how do we say these lines? How do we say them back and forth? How do we work on memorizing our lines? Well, how do we project across the room? And so that might not just be about the script, but it might be like other activities and
Mm.
exercises I'm bringing in that will work with, that are working with like speech work and projection and
Oh,
really
and improv games too.
improv games.
Yeah.
Yep. And
Yeah.
so then that also is like, if there's a song we're learning. So those are happening within that like first week or so of a 4 week block. And then we get to a point where, we start to, about a week and a half in, I'm gonna look at costuming. Like, and we talk about that as a class, like what costumes do we want? We
Mm.
start and then we look at actually usually it's the second week or so I start talking about setting and how is the stage organized. We don't have the setting all set up just yet, but we're working on it,
Yeah.
developing it. Then we go into costuming and we pull that together with setting. And then we have at least like a week to a week and a half of acting, practicing on stage with our costumes. What does this look like? So I like usually have a rhythm that is progressing in that way over the block period of time. And so that it's layering each section of what we have to do to perform this play,
Yeah.
starting with speech and development. And then, like you're saying, improv and interaction together. What does that look like? We can practice all that in the classroom. And then we
Yeah.
start thinking about staging and costuming and then putting it all together. And I also think that it's really important to, as you were saying, not just focus on the play and the script itself, but add in improv and speech work and singing that is happening kind of in tandem with that work that you're doing with the play, and maybe even some journaling and writing that comes out of it too for the students to process the experiences that they're having, especially as you get into the upper grades. Like, I think in the lower grades, of course, they don't need to do all of that, but they could do some drawing out of the
Yeah.
play. You could have some pictures or small writing that you're doing out of the play that, they have in their lesson book, like some pages that come from their experience of the play as well. So that there's many different ways for them to process that work rather than just what's happening with the
Hmm.
production.
Yeah. One of the things I learned in my teacher training was like one of my instructors was just adamant. She just thought there should not be a dedicated play block and
Mm,
that really it should happen within the context like of everything else that you're doing and you shouldn't, you know, stop other stuff, to make the play happen. And I remember like hearing that and that resonates. The idea resonates for me. But I don't think I ever found a way to make that happen. I think maybe I did it like a few years I did maybe just like 2 weeks where we generally had, we didn't have a play block, but we did have 2 weeks where the play was all that we did,
yeah.
a week before and then the performance. Any thoughts about that? Have you always done a dedicated play block?
No, actually, I
Okay.
haven't. I mean, yes and no, I should say. Yes, usually there's been a play block, but I also like to incorporate theater and dramatic play into a lot of lessons that we do. So it's
Yeah.
not just that we've done acting and play work during a play block. We might have, like, I had a little play in third grade, Adam and Eve, that we put together in our classroom. Didn't show it to anyone. It was
Mm,
just for us as a class, but that's what we worked on. We
yeah.
worked on, learning that story through being able to act it out, which was really a fun way to do that, especially I think in those lower grades. Like, it is something that you can bring in where you're doing dramatic play in different ways. I did in second grade. I had a whole story I wrote about a princess and the towers for place value for math. And the whole premise of the story was that she was getting married and she wanted as many jewels at her wedding as there were stars in the night sky. And so, the gnomes had to get to work. They had a ton of work to do to dig up all of those jewels and fill up all the towers, which of course were like ones place, tens place, hundreds place, thousands
Ah,
place. But
yeah.
it was this whole production that we put on, and we actually did a little performance out of it. And we had the gnomes and the princess and, all of these things that happened throughout the story that we were able to act out. We even made food for it that was part of the wedding celebration. And
Yeah.
so I think there's lots of ways to incorporate drama and theater work. Um, but I also think if you are to do a production in which you're actually performing it for the families, for other students, there does need to be a dedicated time for it. And I think it really depends what you have available at your school. So
Mm,
at Cedarwood, I know we don't have a whole lot of practice periods outside of daily lesson time. But at other schools, there are a lot of times
yeah.
where you could set up 2 or 3 days a week that is just theater class for 2 months or 2.5 months, and that, or however long you want to work on it, and that at the end you have a production that you would put
Hmm.
together. But I find at Cedarwood with less practice periods, it's hard to find time outside of daily lesson to carve out time to practice for it.
Yeah, yeah, that
So.
makes a lot of sense. I had another question that is not has left my brain at the moment. Yeah.
I would
Oh,
add
oh,
that
it was
I think
about,
it,
I know, it was about so this conversation we've had about like finding structure, one thing that came up for me as I was teaching was that I found that math was a good thing to do during the play block, or have a math block that you're working on however you decide to structure it, but that math was a good partner for that work because it just is more structured. And I remember feeling like during the play, it was really easy for them to go out, and that math would just kind of help bring them in. And that was really helpful. It also makes me think about time of year and when to do the play. And I've done it at different times. I think in eighth grade, I did it in December, and I think I've done it. I don't think I ever did it in June, but I have experimented with doing it later, like in May. So like now, like February, January, February. Thoughts about that? Do you have a preference, or what have you noticed doing it at different times of the year?
I don't know if I have a preference. I mean, I do kind of like this January to March, I should say,
Yeah,
space, just because it feels like we're focused,
yeah,
and we can really get a lot done. And depending on what grade you're in, sometimes the spring gets really busy with activities, like Olympiad or
yeah.
global games or whatever it may be, like depending on which grade you're teaching in.
And they're
Sometimes,
very out at that time, which you
yeah,
would think, oh, great, the play, they tend to go out during the play. But at the end of the year, like, they have to be in enough to be productive. Like
it's that
sometimes at
balance,
the end
right?
of the
Like
year,
take them
like,
out a little bit when they're
right,
in and bring them in a little bit when they're out.
right, exactly. Like there has to be a balance there. And then to have them then like on display when they're so like out, like oof. I think that's why I never dared try June, but I don't know. I've seen some pretty fantastic plays in June too, but
June sometimes it feels like too late for me. I'm like, we're supposed to be putting our books together and cleaning up our room and getting, finalizing the things
right.
of the year.
Yeah,
Usually
yeah,
I've done them by May, like you've said.
yeah.
Usually what I found is in the lower grades, like first, second, third, I usually will pick between March and May, like that
Mm,
end of the year, just because there's, so much maturity at that age that
yeah,
happens between January and March. Like that sometimes they're able to pick things up in a stronger way in that springtime. But for the older grades, I always enjoyed trying to do them, like you said, December, January,
yeah,
February, March, like in this winter time,
yeah,
just to capture it. They know each other pretty well by fifth grade. You know their characters pretty well by fifth grade. And so casting it is a little bit different than in the
yeah,
lower grades because you really have a strong picture of what you're trying to achieve with
yeah,
the play. Um, and I think eighth grade, I haven't ever actually fully taught in eighth grade, but I've helped out in many eighth grades. And I know in Bend, Miss Anderson always did her plays in December. And I think it was just really nice because they get really busy in the spring.
yeah,
Even this time of year, they're applying to high schools, like they're doing applications, they're trying,
yeah,
there's just so much that's going on for them,
yeah,
that to give them this kind of moment in, December or January of culmination with that work,
yeah.
that they can become that nostalgic place, person they
Right.
get to in the spring. Like, right, the eighth grade student is always in this, like, oh, it's my last time doing that. Oh, it's my last. Oh, it's our last time.
Right,
Everything's the
right.
last. And
Yeah,
so it's like, without the stress of the play ahead of them, they can really like sink into that
yeah,
nostalgia, really being present with their community for those last moments of experiences through May Day and whatever
yeah,
those spring experiences are.
yeah. That's good. That's good. Well, do you have any other last thoughts? I don't have any other questions coming to mind, but anything burning
I
that we
would
haven't talked
say, like,
about?
some of my very last thoughts would be for teachers maybe that are new to Waldorf education and to, just that might be a little nervous about taking on their first production or their first performance or their first play. But I would just encourage them to, you know, have fun with it,
Hmm.
enjoy the moment with the students and not to get too caught up in like what the final product is, but really what is the experience that the students are having along the way and you're having along the way.
Yeah.
Trying to not get overly stressed about each situation, but really just enjoying the moment that you have together to dive a little deeper into community building and social and emotional relations with one another.
Yeah.
So just
Yeah.
encouragement, I would say, for
Yeah.
for teachers that are taking it on for their
Yeah.
first time because it can feel daunting. And to remember that it doesn't always have to be a production in which the students are performing either. That could be a shadow puppet play. It could be
Yeah.
a marionette play.
I'll say seventh grade. We did a shadow puppet play in seventh grade, and I just because the first time I taught seventh grade, I just remember like I actually questioned the pedagogy behind doing a play with seventh graders because they are so like they're at their most vulnerable, I think.
Right.
Like they
Yes.
feel on stage every moment of their lives and it's
Yes.
really uncomfortable. And so like I think it's nice to give I have seen some really amazing seventh grade plays too. I will say that. Like this is not like, across the board. I don't want to say that, but I remember just feeling like my seventh graders were not they were not going to be on stage, like that just was not the right thing for them. And so yeah, I think that's a really good point. Oh, one thing we haven't talked about, and that is, does every child have a role and like an acting role in the play? Because I have seen sometimes teachers do like they'll have a crew, like some
Mhm.
children are set builders or some children are costume builders. And do you have any thoughts about that? Can some children be doing just that and not participate in the drama of it?
Yeah,
Any
I
thoughts?
do have some thoughts on that. I do want to say one thing. I teach marionette making and puppetry, and I taught a seventh grade once. We did fairy tales, and they made all their own marionettes, and then they did a whole puppet play,
Oh,
like pretty involved puppet play that we then, showcased to the whole school and to the early childhood and all of that. Which is really sweet because often early childhood doesn't come to our performances in the
yeah.
upper grades. And so to have like the seventh graders be able to feel like they were giving back to the early child was really
Yeah.
fantastic. But as you were saying, the seventh grader often is like,
Right.
like, like this is the image of the seventh grader, right? And
Right.
so in marionette making, you have to bring your shoulders back. You have to stand upright. You have to like, in order to move those puppets in a very beautiful way. Like you have
Yeah.
to rise up. And I found that to be a really amazing thing to bring to seventh graders. And some of the students, their main teacher at the time, was just amazed at the growth and development that they had going through working with marionettes and being
Oh,
able to stand, all of a sudden being able to stand more upright in their own individuality, have more confidence and more strength, not through performing on a stage, but through performing through a puppet. Um,
wow.
and I just really wanted to share that because I think that
Yeah.
that can be a really fantastic thing to bring to, that age range in sixth, seventh, eighth grade, like those
That's
upper grades at some
fantastic.
point.
I love it.
As far as production crews or lighting design engineers or sound engineers, I do believe it really can give some students a place that maybe are struggling to be on the stage at that point in time. Again, if you're staying with the class, like over a period of time, if the students are here over a period of time, I would hope that at some point they are having that opportunity to kind of, to step forth on the stage, to be able to bring forth that confidence to speak lines. Um, but I also think that at certain times in certain places, it is, I think, powerful to have them step into those other roles. If you're doing lights or sound or even staging for a play, you have to be fully aware of the entire thing.
Yeah.
Like you're
Right.
not just in, like so often when you have one part, you become kind of like especially as you get in the upper grades and you have a specific role and this is your part and these are
Yeah,
your lines, it can kind of be tunnel vision as to like, this is my role and these are the parts I need to learn. And I don't have to worry so much about the other cues or points because I'm not on stage at that time or
right.
whatever it may be. Where a lighting person or a sound person, they really have to pay attention to everybody's line, everybody's movement, and in the entirety of the play.
Yeah,
So it can be really good for students that maybe aren't feeling a part of the whole or are having a hard time seeing the whole of the class, or maybe need to have empathy with the whole of the class because they have to step into this role where they really actually, to do that role well, have to see everybody in
yeah,
the class. And I think there's something really powerful that can come out of that.
yeah. That's amazing. That's great.
So,
Well, Laura, it has been so fun chatting with you this Sunday
yes,
morning.
of course.
Um,
Our
we'll
tea
have
on a
to,
rainy day.
I know, we'll have to come up with some more topics. I think we got lucky this time because we had some snow days, so we felt
Right.
a little bit luxurious in our we had a little bit of extra free time, I would say. But
Definitely.
yeah, yeah. But I would love to have you back on and we can talk about some more things. And I know that
Awesome.
you've got lots of great ideas about things and experience with your teacher training and all of that. So it would be
Well,
fun to
thank you,
have you
Meredith.
on.
It was a lot of fun to be here.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a great day.
All right.
Talk to you later.